there's a point you get into a certain level of consciousness where you get to a point of no return as far as of the actions you're taking that are congruent with how you perceive reality. Because a lot of times we perceive reality a certain way and we're living in a complete contradiction to the reality in which we believe. Like right now, where mentally I'm not conformed to the structures of the system, yet I still physically am participating in that system, regardless that I despise it because I have to pay bills, I have to eat. So just checking out and going living in the middle of the woods isn't really an option for me, including the fact that I also have a family. I have a young kid, I have a wife, which I'm grateful for because not a lot of men my age, in their early 20s get to say they have that. Even though when I did get married really young, I got a lot of backlash and ridicule from it. But that's besides the point. I'm getting off topic. How is it that you escape the system? That's a question I'm genuinely curious about. I know it's easy to start a YouTube channel, you know, go online somewhere, and that does seem the default decision, like by proxy. That's like what you should be doing now. If that's like the modern day version of civil disobedience. Like Henry David Thoreau, he went and lived in the middle of the woods for 2 years on Walden Pond and, screwed off from society. This is like the modern day equivalent to that because we're so detached from our natural reality that it's like it's impossible to go and just live in a cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere without first having like weaned yourself into that because like we are so dependent on the system, even if we adhere to the system, if that makes sense. Like convenience has kind of destroyed our ability to create our own freedom. So it's like the way around that is to share your thoughts, your ideas into the void and hit publish and share it on the internet and receive get ad revenue and then you receive fake fiat dollars, numbers on the screen. That's the world we live in. Like nothing about modern society is authentic. Like none of it's real, but it's the system that we're in and we have to participate in if we, want to survive until we can kind of get to a point where we can wean ourselves into a place of like where we're more ingrained into our nature, where we're more physically detached from the confines of what the system has designed for us. And not everybody will get to that point. I have conversations with a lot of people in my day to day life, at work and stuff like that. And you realize how like socially engineered people are to parrot the same things as everyone else. Like very rarely do I get authentic conversations with people with any sort of depth. And I'm not saying I don't consider myself that intelligent, but I consider myself I mean, I know some stuff, but I don't consider myself naturally intelligent. I'll have conversations with people who on paper who are, who are smart people, but yet they are so like socially blind to like how reality operates of how the system works. And you realize very quickly into the conversation whether or not that person is asleep or awake. And more often than not, they're usually asleep. You see this if you try to pierce through any sort of, you try to pierce through the curtain of the constructs of their beliefs. Most of the time, you see their brains actively shut down. They'll walk away, find a way to cut the conversation short, etc. And that's that. And my point with that is I feel like it's designed that way. Like most people aren't going to be able to even want or have the mentality. Most people aren't actually sheep. They're gonna follow the herd. They're gonna have the herd mind, and that's just the way it is. And you need those people, to function as society. But there's people who, I guess you could say me, like I'm one of those people who have kind of awakened to just how BS a lot of things are, and it's not an easy reality to operate within because a lot of the people that you're close to aren't going to think the same way either. So they're going to call you crazy. They're going to think you're weird. They're not going to understand your mental framework for how you perceive reality. And just it gets worse the deeper you go into, the deeper you study, the more you read, the more like perceptive you are of how things work, the more detached you not only become like from like the desires of this materialistic uh, desires that we're told that we should want, but the more detached you are from the people around you. Like that gap starts the gap increases more and more and more over time, the deeper you go into, because you realize most people will stay intellectually infantile. Like most people stay in a state of infancy, in a state of adolescence their whole lives. Most people go to work, come home, turn on the TV, go to sleep, repeat. Like that's how most people are operating. Like you still see, I still to this day I see people in the grocery store wearing masks, and it's like that's inconceivable. Like how, that's beyond anything of what I'm able to comprehend of how you can still be psyoped into believing that you should be wearing a mask. And so basically, what I'm trying to say is that the path to enlightenment, I guess you would say, is a very lonely journey. Like that scene in The Matrix where he talks about ignorance being bliss. There's a lot of truth to that. Like ignorance is very bliss. I mean, it's partially true that the more ignorant I was of how reality works, the happier I was. I was a lot happier when I was more ignorant of how things work. And I'm not necessarily unhappy that I know the things that I know, but it definitely hasn't been a pleasant journey. It's like your whole mental framework for how you thought the world worked, it completely comes crashing down on you. And it takes a long time to process that and be able to now assimilate the pieces that have collapsed around you into something that can work under the new way you now perceive reality. Like I went through a whole process of just living in abject hopelessness where I was just constantly angry, and there was just a big gap of no goals, no ambitions. It was literally just trying to make it through the day, just exist long enough to go to sleep, wake up. As soon as I wake up, is just try to make it until the end of the day where I can just go to sleep. I was just ruminating and just sitting alone with my miserable thoughts of woe is me, of how much I resented living in current society. And it wasn't very helpful. And it was a very bad place to be in, especially when you got people depending on you to survive. It's not a place you want to be in because you can't just check out. You can't just slum on the couch and, sleep your life away. That's impossible when you got other people that are involved. And I was in that place for a long time, and I'm actively trying to get my way out of that. But I'm still very, ignorant and amateur to the understanding of how I can make that a reality. Like this YouTube channel, for example, I guess is a way of doing that. But again, this was a video about just random thoughts. And as I continue, things will hopefully get more coherent and my stream of consciousness will flow better than what this video and the last video have been. So I appreciate you for listening if you have made it this far. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.